so much for being here. I'm Laura Zalia. This is Paul Benson.
Paul Benson.
And we'd like to introduce Dan Waber, our speaker for tonight. Yay! This event is sponsored by the Department of English and the Department of Media Studies and Production, so I'd also like to say thank you to both of those departments. I first saw Dan Waber present at the Library of Congress, the first electronic literature performance show at the Library of Congress, and I thought his presentation was inspiring and fantastic and would be really good to bring to Temple. So I'm so glad that he's here and that you all are here. And Paul has more.
Do you want to say a little about
Oh, yes. And we, Paul Benson's electronic literature class has the hashtag TUELIT13. And so we're also having this conversation at the hashtag. So if you're on Twitter, you can follow the hashtag or participate while the event is going on. So you can read the Twitter back channel and have another conversation. We're all on Twitter, so we will all respond to you. And you're very much invited to be part of that conversation.
So again, I'm Paul Benson. I teach here in the Department of English. I want to second Laura in thanking you all for coming, and the English Department and Media Studies Production Department for generously supporting Dan's visit. I imagine if you're here, you've seen at least in passing the flyer for this event with Dan's bio on it, but I just want to read it and kind of say a word or two about it because I think it sets the tone for his work really nicely. So here's the bio. Dan Waber is a poet, playwright, publisher, and multimedia artist whose work is almost always language-based. A web search on his name in quotes will produce a veritable cornucopia of literary oddments, amusements, and gewgaws. Gewgaws?
Gewgaws.
Gewgaws, okay, I had to look that up. Things he's made have landed themselves in The Art of English, The Poet's Craft, the Electronic Literature Collection Volume 1, Drunken Boat, the Iowa Review on Web, in books, broadsides, anthologies, and ephemeral publications, in mailboxes, on stage, in a puppet theater, online, on buses, on gallery walls, and at the Library of Congress. He has also written more sestinas than there are particles in the known universe. So we've been talking a lot in my class about form and content in writing and in digital literature, and I think that says in both form and content a lot about Dan Waber and his work, right? You'll notice that there are a lot of lists, not just accomplishments and venues and publications, as impressive as those are, but it says something about what he's doing and saying with language. Right? It takes a special kind of work to place your writing on buses and in puppet shows and to read at the Library of Congress. Right? There's an interesting combination there that we'll see in some of what he talks about. Please join me in welcoming Dan Waber. And I will say he is one of the fastest, although maybe he won't be doing it tonight, he is one of the fastest and most generous respondents on Twitter and email that I've had the pleasure of working with. So if he doesn't respond to you tonight,
it's because I'm
what he writes,
right here.
Yes, exactly. He certainly will. So definitely join us in that.
Well, you guys just took the first half of my opening remarks, but I will say a couple things briefly before I start showing a whole bunch of stuff. I'll probably go very fast because all of this is online, and if you want to go back and revisit it, you're welcome to. If anybody can't hear, just wave and I'll speak up, but I'm not going to do anything with the mic because I think the room is small enough and I'm loud enough that everybody can hear. You are welcome to leave your phones on. You are welcome to text people while I'm talking. You are encouraged to tweet the event using the hashtag that they mentioned. I don't have any problem with that at all. I also prefer dialogue to monologue, but in a situation like this, dialogue is really tough. But if you do have something that you immediately want to ask, if you get my attention, I'll stop and talk to you. I'm happy to do that. I know it is tough to do in this kind of setting, but don't be shy, I guess is what I'm saying. You won't insult me. Also, when I'm done, there'll be about 15 minutes of question and answer. If people have specific questions and you feel that's a more appropriate time, that's fine. And then will be at about 8 o'clock, and some people have to leave. And I'm also going to stick around because I know some of Laura's students are a little geekier and may want to talk about processing and programming, and I'm going to stick around and talk about that too. But I'm going to try not to talk a whole lot about programming in this part because this is sort of more just a general broad overview of some of the goofy things that I have done that are at the intersection of the digital and the textual. I think that to call this a reading is difficult because I'm not really going to be reading, I'm going to be sort of showing. But I think it's difficult to describe what an event like this is. Normally, being a writer is a lonely life anyway, because you sit and you write and then you send it out there and you wait and you hope and you hear nothing. But writing electronic literature is almost even more lonely because you're not even writing text a lot of the time, you're writing code. And when you get done writing that code, you put it up on a website and that's it, you're done. And you really hear nothing from nobody. One of my friends, Jim Andrews, who's an amazing digital artist, he keeps extensive web statistics, and he says you get an email from somebody about once every 10,000 visitors. 1 out of every 10,000 will say something, give you some kind of feedback. So it's an extremely lonely thing. So the first time I started going out and doing presentations like this, it was really unnerving for me because to talk about the thing that you yourself do is a little bit awkward. It feels a little self-promotional, which I'm not really very good at. But I'm going to show you mostly things that are mine, but other projects that I've been involved in that are other people's stuff as well. So the things that I'm going to show you, they've been called at various times hypermedia, new media, multimedia, electronic literature, e-literature, e-lit, digital art, poems that move, born digital, text art, and a lot more. Nobody knows even what to call what this stuff is. Come on in. I think there's space and there's maybe chairs. Are we out of chairs? Well, you might be standing. Sorry. But I find that really interesting. That I think the things I'm going to show you tonight are all of a piece, but nobody knows what these things are really called, or they've been changing, and the names have been changing pretty rapidly. So I would like you to think of yourselves at the turn of the previous century, maybe at a carnival, sitting in a tent with some friends to check out the moving pictures, which would later be called movies, motion pictures, or cinema. Because to me, that's what this kind of material is. It's what's next. It's the fusion of all of these technologies coming together and being applied to the existing arts. It isn't cinema, but it borrows a lot from cinema. It isn't literature, but it borrows a lot from literature. It isn't any of these things. It is its own thing. So that's all of my introduction. I'm going to start showing you some things. Like I said, this is roughly chronological, but not exactly. So the first thing I ever did that was ever published on the internet was this. It's called Strings, and I'll go through them and talk while they're going on. What you're seeing is Flash, but they weren't made in Flash. They were made in a program that doesn't even exist anymore called MorphInk. And what MorphInk was for, MorphInk was to make animated GIFs, basically. What you would do is you would start with one frame, and then you would put up a second frame, and then you would push the button, and it would make the frames in between. It would tween. That's what that's called. So my wife at the time, I bought her for Christmas a Wacom tablet. And a tablet is it's an input device with a pen and a stylus. And I knew that I was going to be doing tech support for this device for her. So I started playing around with this tablet and figuring out what I could do. So I made all of these in one night. This is my handwriting. It's not a font. It's not something computer generated. It's what was my actual handwriting at the time. So I sent these to my friend Jim Andrews, and Jim really liked them, and he put them up on his website. And what happened then was they got written about by some people who were early scholars of digital literature, electronic literature. And because the right people wrote about it at the right time, in a very real sense, the reason I'm here today is because of this hour and 40 minutes that I spent in my house in 1999. Now, these were made in 1999, which I tell people all the time, I have a love-hate relationship with strings, because I love them because what from the internet is still even relevant from 1999? So I feel, at the risk of being cliche, humbled and blessed that anybody even still gives a crap about these things because they're from 1999. But on the other hand, I have all of this new stuff that I've done ever since, and so I hate when people say, "Oh, you're the guy who did the strings." I'm like, yeah, I did the strings, and also about 1,000 other things. This particular piece, people sometimes ask about. This is a game my sister and I used to play. The first person would say ha, second person would say ha ha ha, third person would say ha ha ha, and then ha 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 ha, and you would keep going until somebody actually laughed, and whoever laughed lost. And again, I don't want to show everything here because I have a lot to show. This is one piece I still do like because I made a verb. And I think as a writer who is ultimately text-based, that's about the greatest thing you can do is make a verb. Maybe this is my favorite verb, I guess. I could say that. We were talking about if people had favorite verbs earlier. And the other one I want to show, because there was some speculation as what the title was about. The title of this is Poi Dog, and the message that's being played out here is words are like a string that I pull out of my mouth. That's a lyric from a Chicago-based band called Poi Dog Pondering from a song called Pomegranate. And I thought the string portion of it pertained pretty well to this particular project. So, like anything else, you start to do something and then you do a little bit more. I elaborate a little bit. I got invited because of that piece to make some pieces for somebody else. I'm not going to show all of these because I don't like these as much because I think they get, I started adding more complexity that, I like to keep things simple. Minimalism is so hard to me. Minimalism is so, I'm so drawn to whenever somebody can do something really, really simple and elegant and beautiful. So for me, I thought the version 2 of these started doing things like adding color, and it didn't help. But in one sense, I do want to tell this story because it's kind of funny. The message that's being spelled out is get the ones in the blue box. And the word blue is not in blue, it's in pink. And that was a result of my wife sending me to the store to buy something, and she said, get the ones in the blue box. And they were all in blue boxes. They just had different colored ribbons on the box. So kind of a typical miscommunication that people have. Or maybe not typical. It was typical for me anyway. This is a piece with sound. Hopefully we'll be able to hear it. I don't need a green card. This was, my wife is also a poet and a playwright and a wonderful writer of many different texts. And when you're married to someone who is also an artist, a lot of really wonderful things can happen. And this particular piece started out as a text message that my wife sent me that I didn't want to get rid of. And I didn't know what to do with it because it was so small, but I wanted to do something with it. So the first thing I did with it was I made a concrete poem out of it, and you'll see that in a minute. And then it was a performance piece that I used to perform. And then I sent it to this guy named Rainer Strasser in Germany, who makes these things.
Oh.
And he invited different people to record.
Oh.
One of these is my wife. One of them is her daughter.
Oh.
Some of them are in Argentina or Austria.
Oh.
And Rainer made it specifically, he's a really organic nature guy. He made it so you specifically could not get more than, I think, 3 or 4 going at once. You have to take the time to get through it. But if you get through all of it, then an Easter egg will come at the end, once you've hit every dot, and that gives you the whole piece. So the phrase that she sent me was, rain writes O in the puddles. And I turned it into this piece, which became that piece. This is one that ended up on a bus, too, speaking of where things end up.
How did that end up on the bus?
There was, in northeastern Pennsylvania, they had a program called Poetry in Transit. And they invited local poets to submit work, and then in the place of where advertising goes on these buses, about 30% of the advertising space was given over to poetry from local poets. So I sent them that piece, and because it's that perfect rectangle, it fit nicely. Now, the piece that was up when you guys walked in, this is called IUE, and I'm gonna, this was done, Dudley House Literary Society at Harvard had put out a call for, they were gonna do an exhibit an art exhibit, a visual art exhibit on the theme of infinity. So I was working on something else that wasn't done, but this is the same engine for it. So what this is a 13 by 13 by 13 cube that you can really only see half of because the rest of it is behind you. The eye is the red in the center. That's like the 1 by 1 by 1 cube in the very center. It doesn't move because it's the centerpiece. And then the way a cube works, the next layer out is 3 by 3 by 3 layer, and that is all populated with present tense verbs. And then the next layer out of that onion is a 5 by 5 by 5 cube. That's all populated with the word you. And the next layer out is all verbs, 7 by 7 by 7. The next layer out is the word we, and then the next layer out is all present tense verbs. So I went through this list of 38,000 English present tense verbs, and I went through the list systematically and took out the ones that I didn't want. There were certain things that I didn't want to come into this. I didn't want these words to appear. I wanted to control what was possible to see. So I culled that down to a list of 22,000 present tense verbs. And what happens, and I'll show you in a second, what happens is when any of those subcells rotate sufficiently behind you off screen, those cells depopulate. And then when it rotates back into view, they repopulate at random from this list of 22,000 present tense verbs. So in a very real sense, what you're looking at right now has really never been seen before and really never will be again because of the nature of permutation. So this can be grabbed and moved, and you can sometimes get a better sense of what the cube is like by controlling it a little bit. If you look at the center, you could read it back. I muck, you yaw, we form. And then we can also watch, if we watch on, let's say, the right-hand edge where, let's do the word indoctrinate, that's a good big word. When indoctrinate goes off screen sufficiently, when we come back, it's not, oh, it's still there. I go for, see it? It's still there. So we'll go a little further, and it should be gone. Oh, now it's going to show me off. There it is, gone now. So now it has repopulated with a whole new set of stuff. So this was on exhibit in an exhibition space on a really big projected thing. But what I was working on at the time was really this. I better show it to you while I'm talking. If I don't show it to you, you want everything to look at. Okay, so what this is a 5 by 5 by 5 cube, much smaller, much easier to deal with. You can put the lines on so you can see it, but then I'll take the lines off. So I got the idea for this 5 by 5 by 5 cube, and I actually wrote this on paper first, as layers that would go back. And the nature of this, I think we can actually make it bigger so it's easier to read. Let me show this. So in this 5 by 5 by 5 cube, each little subcell is populated with a word, and I constructed these sentences to basically be palindromes on the word level instead of on the letter level. A palindrome is a thing that reads the same forward and backwards. So these are all phrases and sentences and lines that can be read forwards or backwards. So as they rotate around, they remain completely readable throughout the rotational. It's fully adjustable, so if you wanted to reset it and read it and just move in single steps to get a better sense of it, and there's 5 different sets of words that it can be filled with. This was what I was working on at the time that the Harvard call came. The Harvard thing had a deadline. This one I was just making for myself, so we put that one aside and then made that. Made a few things on the engine, and I'll show a couple more in a little bit. Now, a little ancient history. In 1984, there was a guy named B.P. Nichols, a Canadian poet, amazing, amazing human being. You will not encounter anybody who will impress you more with both the breadth and depth of their work. He died in 1988 at the age of 44. Went in for surgery on a tumor on his spine, expecting to lose the use of his legs, and he died in the surgery. To say he was at the height of his powers is not even true. He was a rocket on the rise. He wrote sound poetry, visual poetry, concrete poetry. He was a publisher. He was an editor. He wrote episodes of Fraggle Rock. He wrote operas. He did everything that could be done. And in 1984, he was making computer poems. He made these originally on an Apple IIe. And what happened was floppy disks, when they were actually floppy, you guys probably don't even know what that is. Have you guys ever seen a floppy disk? Has anybody seen a floppy disk? Okay. So these were originally done on 5 1/4-inch floppy disks that went into the thing, and then you would type run, and this thing would start to run. So he published these in 1984 via this press, and then those things have a really short life. Like the media itself begins to deteriorate. They call it bit rot. And a 5 1/2-inch floppy has a life of about 10 years. So what happened was, some people realized that if we didn't do something to preserve this material, it was going to be lost forever. Because every day that we don't get this data into some other format, we risk losing it forever. So I worked with a group of people to make this available, hopefully forever. It's now available in 4 different formats. At the time, there were only 2 known intact sets of floppies left of this material, and the guy who wrote it was dead. So we worked to put together a working Apple IIe setup and a set of open source tools that were going to, the first thing we wanted to do was copy the disk, because that was the most important thing, because it was a very real risk that the disks would just fly apart when we put them into the drives. So the first thing we did was copy the disk. Then once we copied it, we ran it to see it, and all of these emulated versions were made. So in 1984, computer poems looked like this. But a big concern of mine is also the preservation of this digital stuff. Because one thing that happens, and I'm going to show you something a little bit later, one thing that happens over time as technology advances and technology develops is technology becomes obsolete. So things that are made today, if you don't think about where they're going to be in 5 years, they may not be viewable in 5 years. That's a really legitimate possibility. Cannot recommend his work high enough. This is a piece with sound. This is a public